These are the dominant 7th chords with a 13th, and lowered and raised 9th, and flat 5, and sharp 11 that are based on the diminished scale, the Octatonic scale, 1, 3, 5, 6 string family, and we'll be doing them on the note A. The beginnings we can look at from here, this A7, A, E, C sharp, and G. We move that to B flat. So we have a basic A chord with a flat 9. Top voice can move to C natural. And then we have an A chord with a raised 9th. So we can also, of course, exchange the voices on the outer two strings. So if we do that, we have this diminished major 7. If we do it with the first type, we have a B flat, diminished major 7, B flat, E, C sharp, and A. And of course, the top note can move to G, which gives us a standard diminished chord. Then if we go back and do this one, we have an A chord over a C, which is C, E, C sharp, and A. And of course, that'll go back to a standard flat 9 type chord. But the interesting thing is that they can derive from, again, the A notes with an A in the bass and notes with B flat in the bass, and then they can be moved, of course, in the minor third sequence. Here's an A7 with flat 9 and a sharp 9. A, C sharp, C, and B flat. If we move the top voice to G, standard sharp 9, A, C sharp, C, and G. Move to a flat 9, of course, with the C going to the B flat inside. Further moving the G to F sharp, and then we're back to our A with an F sharp on top, just like that formation. And then if we move the bass note, we're back to a diminished major 7, resolving, of course. Could resolve to A flat, could resolve, of course, to F, could resolve also to B, or B major, either one. If we move from here too, we'll go back to the B flat one, the B flat diminished major 7. If we move the C sharp to D sharp or E flat, we have a common diminished type chord for a dominant, and of course resolving. And we can move each voice. We can move the top voice, B flat, E, C sharp, and C, and then we can move the middle voice, and we're back at our A sharp 9. If we remember this chord voicing, A, C sharp, C, and G, voice exchange the outer voices, G, C sharp, C, and A. Very common. And then we can move the top voice, and of course we're back to this formation. Voice exchange on these is interesting because we get a tritone sort of sound, A, E, E flat, and B flat. Resolved it to F in that case. So going back here, there's again the tritone sound on the A to the E, and E flat and B flat. Now we can continue to move the voices. In other words, this chord that we had categorized as a major type chord can act as a dominant. We move it to the flat 9, or excuse me, the sharp 9, A, E, E flat, and C. And then moving to the E flat, and it gives us the sound of an A7 going to in that case, to a decadencing on a D chord. Could be a D minor, doesn't matter. Could be either one of those. So sequences can be evolved from these, and there are a lot of options. For instance, if we take these chords and we compress the voices in, this is a B flat, E flat, D flat, and A. That can go from a C, and then that can resolve to a D minor, obviously. So that kind of acts as though as like an E flat 7 with a flat 5 and a 13th kind of a sound. So that works in that sense. That's another another one of the options. There are a lot of different options that have to do with the minor sevenths. And as we know, there are 4 minor sevenths as well as 4 dominant chords. The dominant chords are here, you know, the traditional dominant chords, of course. This is an F sharp 7, B flat, or A sharp, F sharp, E, and C sharp. So we can make a flat 5 out of that, and resolving to a B minor, that sort of a thing, or a B major. But what's interesting too is, if we move the top voice, we have a sharp 9, A sharp, F sharp, E, and A on top. So that's another type of sharp 9 chord that can be had from this chord family. And if we go back to the dominant 7 and make it minor now, this is an E flat minor 7, B flat, G flat, E flat, and D flat. And if we compress the voices, we can see that it will resolve to a B minor. This is an F sharp minor, which resolves to D. And again, this is a minor that resolves to F minor. So if we look and exchange the voices, this is D flat, G flat, E flat, and B flat, resolves to a D rather easily. So that's an easy fit. And again, this is the G flat minor 7, resolving to an F. Now, if we take that idea and voice exchange E flat and D flat for D flat and E flat, so we have B flat, G flat, D flat, and E flat, resolves to a B minor just by moving a couple voices up, B, F sharp, D, and E. And again, that idea can move in minor thirds, so it's the same basic process. Here's an A minor, coming from the diminished scale, of course. E, C, G, and A, moving to F, C, A flat, and B flat. So very easily moved in terms of the minor third relationship. Also, as we know, we can make these flat 5 chords. So this is an E flat minor 7, and now moving B flat to A, it's a minor with a flat 5. And these can also be made into dominants, going to minors and then resolving. So, for instance, this is a B flat C7, made into an A minor, and then resolving to a B. And those are available as well in this chord set. Some other options that are interesting with sharp 9s. This is a bit of a stretch voicing, but it can demonstrate the inner voice motion that's possible. This is an A7, so this is C sharp, G, C, and A. G moves to G flat, moves to E, moves to E flat. So we now have these sharp 9 type sounds that are easy to get some nice inner voice motion. Contrary motion is also possible in these as in all the others. For example, using that type of a chord, I'll use C sharp, F sharp, C, and A, and perhaps move the F sharp to E. The outer voices will move in contrary motion, and maybe I'll put an E flat in, because there are minor 6 chords obviously in this as well. They have that sound as well. So C sharp, E, E flat, and A. Bottom voice moves down, top voice moves up. C, E, C sharp, and B flat, and maybe add the raised 9th. C sharp goes to D sharp. Voice exchange, C goes to B flat goes to C, B flat, E, E flat, C, and then finally cadencing out to A, E, E flat, and C sharp, and then resolving to an A flat minor, A, E flat, C flat, and D flat. So you have this sort of static E and E flat inside, and that sort of a sound can be in that fashion, so those can be sequenced. Also, the easy ones physically work too. I mean, this was the sharp 9 flat 9, A, C sharp, C, and B flat, moving up to B, E, E flat, and C, moving to the C version of that, and C sharp. That's a perfectly acceptable resolution. The minor sevenths are interesting also in other versions, and they'll tie into what we were saying earlier about minor sevenths in this scale. Here is E, A, G, and C, and this is an A minor 7. Now, to move to the tritone relationship minor 7, we said that each pair of fourths and fifths exchange. So the perfect fourth extends to the perfect fifth, it expands, and the other perfect fourth contracts to a perfect fifth. So E, A, G, and C becomes E flat, B flat, G flat, and D flat. And that resolves nicely to D, D major, or D minor. So, and that, it's a nice progression. Very, very interesting. Just moving it down in minor thirds. So again, to illustrate that, E and A became B flat and E flat and B flat, and this G and C on the top contracted to a perfect fifth. And notice that just contracts very nicely. As well. And they're within the scale. They all have to do with the diminished scale itself. Also, some easier to finger combinations with fourths mixed in with sixths. E and A, B flat, and G can move to the 13th, so G can move to G flat. Or just, and this can, you can move the sixths, and that works equally well. So that's nice. Just as this kind of tritone relationship, the A, E, E flat, and B flat going to B, C going to D, C tritone going to D in that sense. So those are all perfectly acceptable and easy to play. That's a very easy one to get your fingers around. It's not too physically challenging. That can contract to this. So as long as it's within the scale, it works. And it's convincing in terms of its cadential value and its sound. So that gives you a broad overview of the diminished, dominant chords, really, that work within the diminished scale for this chord family. And there are quite a bit of them. So there's a lot of experimentation that can be had with this. One final thought is the tritone relationship, again in another way. Here's an E flat. We'll take it from the same scale. Here's an E flat with an A on top. E flat, A, E, and C sharp. By moving the inner voice, we have this. So there's a lot of inner voice motion that can be had. Now, if we voice exchange, we have this. So we have in E flat, A, E, and C sharp becomes C sharp, A, E, and E flat. And now the voice. So now we have some interesting inner voice motion just by shifting those, and again mirroring or using the voice exchange principle, we can really get a lot of inner voice. Again, even just this, we can get a lot of very interesting sequences, not just the top. Very, very interesting inner and outer voice motion, bass motion, of course, as well. So any of the voices. So they, you know, any of these kind of exchange. Those are good voice exchanges, again, with the tritone. And then, you know, using a sharp 9 sound. So we have all sorts of options that we can use with those. So again, that's the basics for 1, 3, 5, 6 dominant 7 chords with raised and lowered ninths and 13ths, sharp 11, flat 5, coming from the diminished scale on A.